Hello, welcome to HLA Live. HLA Live is our regular broadcast on the HLA YouTube channel as well as all the other social media channels. Each week we talk to interesting people from across the HLA community to share with us their ideas and their innovations and hopefully bring them to a global audience. Many of the topics come from our community, with scholars and faculty expressing an interest in many of the discussions that we're about to have. HLA programs are built on 6 pillars. The leader is an innovator and entrepreneur, the leader is a communicator, the leader is a manager, the leader as a negotiator, the leader as a follower, and the leader as a philosopher. If you are interested in becoming a HLA scholar, why not get in contact? Many of the episodes in HLA Live will cover one or more of these important pillars. The HLA team consists of Pedra, Eamon, Tim, Riddy, Alistair, Adil and Trisha, and a range of other HLA scholars and faculty. Welcome to the HLA Live episode on addiction and the new normal. Tonight's episode is hosted by Eamon Rawlins, a former HLA scholar and a current HLA cohort director. Eamon is a member of the HLA Live team and will be your host for this episode.
Hello and welcome to the newest HLA Live episode on addiction and the new normal. We are very lucky to have with us tonight Leanne Patrick, a registered mental health nurse working in a substance misuse service with emphasis on drug and alcohol dependence, domestic violence, and trauma. Leanne is also working towards a master in social research and is the founder of @WeStudentNurse, a Twitter-based peer support network for student nurses. We are also very lucky to have Professor Henrietta Bowden-Jones, who is a consultant psychiatrist in addictions and a neuroscience researcher. She was awarded OBE in 2019 for services and research in addiction treatment. Professor Bowden-Jones is currently president-elect of the Royal Society of Medicine Psychiatry section. Hello and welcome to both of our speakers. So Leanne, I'm just going to start out by asking you a few questions, if that's all right.
That's fine.
So, how well are we diagnosing and managing drug and alcohol dependence?
Yeah, so diagnosing, I think it really depends upon whether or not a person is wishing to access help for their addiction. So that would involve them, certainly in Scotland, either presenting to their GP or going to a third sector organisation that can either see them there, or if there's kind of a mental health issue, which is why we would need to see them, certainly a complex mental health issue, then they would be referred to us in the NHS. So, we wouldn't necessarily see anybody unless they encountered those services or perhaps another mental health service where it might be detected. So it really depends upon those things, how much a person wants to be engaged with the service and treatment, and also how much, I suppose, it's well understood by other mental health staff, what they're looking at, if it's mentioned to them. I think primary care mental health teams are quite good at picking up addiction. They see quite a lot of it. It's often, comorbid, for people with different mental health diagnoses, as I suppose a way of self-medicating in a way to cope with their mental health concerns or trauma or issues that they're experiencing. So yeah, it can be quite difficult in that it requires for a lot of people that they need to or want to engage with the service. In terms of, maintaining or managing a treatment program, I think we struggle with that in Scotland. I think more than many other places, we have quite low numbers of people in treatment. And that can be quite a challenging thing. Certainly if you think, for example, of people who are in methadone programs, it's quite challenging because part of that involves a person going to their pharmacy every single day, quite often, to collect their medication. And that's often seen, understandably, as quite a ball and chain for people to be attending daily. It really limits what they can do with their life. It stops them from driving if they present to the service as well and enter a treatment program. It can interfere with, a whole variety of things. How do you maintain employment if you need to be at the pharmacy every single day at a certain time? So you need to be able to have either a flexible employer, or, you know, have a relationship with them where you can be honest about that, which isn't really always the case. And also navigating childcare, getting to appointments. There's a lot of challenges there that mean that as a service we try to be as flexible as possible, but there are definitely still some limitations. And I think that, yeah, that can be really difficult to encourage people to kind of stay in treatment. Also, there's quite a lot of stigma being in treatment, certainly being on methadone. In my experience, it can be quite difficult to, even though we know that methadone keeps people safe, it can save lives, you know, it reduces the risk of further injecting and the bloodborne viruses and other infections that come along with that. So, yeah, the difficulty with the stigma is that it prevents people from not only engaging with a treatment program like that because they don't want to be seen to be on methadone, and also they don't want to necessarily go up to too high of a dose. So sometimes we're finding that people are sub-therapeutic, or certainly sub the kind of therapeutic dose that they might personally be needing, because they don't want to go up too high, because, as I say, with the kind of ball and chain effect of the pharmacy, the higher up you go in your methadone, the longer it takes for you to kind of come down. And the bigger the risk is there if you kind of disengage with treatment, of going into quite significant withdrawals. So there are lots of kind of practical difficulties that we're experiencing in terms of maintaining a person within that treatment. And that's, yeah, that's some of the issues that we're facing at the moment, I think.
Thank you so much for that, Leanne. So in your opinion, other than kind of, what would you say is kind of the biggest factor that causes people to stop methadone treatment?
That's so hard, because the nature of these things is that they're so multifaceted. You know, the way that we work in substance misuse services is very much a multi-agency approach, and often we're encountering people who have quite a lot of different things in their lives that they're struggling with. So often it's finances, employment, their social factors, you know, how well supported they are by their family and friends, if they even have friends that, you know, they can rely upon. So the difficulty is you can't really maintain somebody in treatment for whom I suppose all of these other things aren't slotting into place. So I think the biggest difficulty I face is, as a nurse, being often the main coordinator of all those agencies, which means quite a lot of demand upon the staff who work in these services, and also trying to get all those pieces into place, or getting all the pieces of the puzzle to fit, so that you can make sure somebody's well supported enough that it's easier for them to engage with the treatment.
And kind of like, as a nurse, how do you feel like you are kind of impacted more emotionally, because you basically spend a lot more time with these patients?
Yeah, I think some days are more challenging than others. I think there's certainly, as a mental health nurse, you expect to encounter a lot of this, a lot of trauma, a lot of difficult memories and life experiences that people have had that they share with you. I think that's something that, you know, I see as quite an honour and a privilege in a way. It's really nice that people would share that with you, and that's one of the things that I really enjoy about the job, being able to kind of be alongside people as they're going through these really difficult challenges in life, and as they're kind of processing those traumas. There definitely are some days that are harder than others, and so I think it's an area of work where you need to have a really good, strong team where you all really work well together and support each other. And you need to be really quite serious about making sure that you switch off at the end of the day, which can be hard, but if you've got, you know, as I do, children and other responsibilities, you have to be able to look after yourself, because you will burn out very rapidly, unfortunately. So we do need a good team spirit. It tends to be the case that everywhere that I've worked, that is the case, because you kind of have to, otherwise it all falls apart very quickly if you don't. So there's good camaraderie there, but yes, that's really important. And one of the things that I think is often one of the things I enjoy quite a lot about the job as well is that team effort.
Thank you so much for that really interesting insight, Leanne. What about you, Professor Bowden-Jones? Do you have any thoughts on, we went a bit off topic, but do you have any thoughts on how well we're managing drug and alcohol dependence?
So I really enjoyed listening to Leanne's contribution. I fully agree with every bit of what you say. I used to run the homeless the methadone centre in Soho Square. So I feel very strongly also the privilege that you're talking about in terms of what is shared and confided in these teams. Now, I suppose my biggest issue really is that we seem to be, in terms of addiction services, in a far worse place than we were 15 years ago. The funding is atrocious. The funding for mental health is atrocious, but particularly for addiction. And there has been a lack of prioritization of people who have been hidden because of their lack of profile in terms of these illnesses, be it mental health, or in this case, we're speaking about addiction. And so, you know, there are now only 5 places in the country where you can receive an alcohol detox if you have mental health issues. If you think of the thousands of people who have problems with alcohol and how many will need detoxes, you realize that at present we have an enormous piece of work to be done. Yes, there will be more money through the NHS long-term plan, but we will need to address the fact that we have de-skilled our workforce too much. We have avoided what we used to have, were teams that were very, very good and specialized in looking after specific populations, like the homeless, you know, the homeless injectors. And these have been removed really for a more generalized approach. But that generalized approach could be perceived as a barrier to treatment when it comes to addiction, because actually people need to be understood, and their particular illnesses, their particular dependencies need to be understood. So, and that is in a way where the behavioral addictions field, despite being so new, has benefited quite a bit, because these are designated national clinics where everyone in the multidisciplinary team is very highly skilled in terms of providing a national service, an evidence-based service, and being able to deliver it. Now, it's much cheaper to provide behavioral addictions treatment than it is to run detoxes for alcohol and drugs. And I do believe that is part of the issue, that it's probably an easier problem to solve than reopening the units that have now closed down, or indeed building new ones.
Thank you for that great insight, Professor Bowden-Jones. So when you say that we've kind of been de-skilled, what do you mean by that?
I mean that the more you remove addiction services from the NHS, and the more you put them in a different context, in our case, in England, it has been, a lot of these services have been moved to outpatient treatment run by non-statutory agencies. And the Royal College of Psychiatrists has an enormous piece of work led by its new president, Adrian James, and by Julia Sinclair, who runs the exec committee for the faculty for addictions. What they are saying is we need to go back to a position where there are enough specialized units to address the demand and to provide the training that the medical workforce needs. Because if you don't have the environment where the doctors can learn how to do complex alcohol detoxes or heroin detoxes, it's going to be very hard to then to have a service for the population. So I suppose that's what I mean. But I will say it's not all bad news, because as we know, there are plans to focus more on addictions than ever before. Certainly in my new role as president of the psychiatry section for the Royal Society of Medicine, I will very much focus on making sure that the profile of these illnesses is raised. I think Leanne was talking about the stigma, and there is still enormous stigma. Less maybe about alcohol. I wonder sometimes people are more able to talk to their employers about maybe drinking too much, brief interventions, etc. But you know, if you're a heroin user, you're hardly likely to go and discuss that with most people. And so that is a real barrier to treatment. If you look at gender, there are issues about, you know, parenting, and we have plenty of women who might have delayed their seeking of treatment because of real fear in relation of what that might do to the family structure and their relationships. So I think in a sort of societal way, we have some work to be done. And I think that kind of work is done by programs like yours, where you are training a generation of new doctors, health professionals, nurses, people who are really interested in understanding what the issues are and what it means to change radically what we've been doing up to now.
Thank you so much. Leanne, do you have anything to add to the topic?
No, I think you've covered it quite succinctly as well. It's interesting, I suppose. The only thing I'd potentially add is that here in Scotland, I think we do possibly have more provision for detoxes. You know, they tend to take place on mental health wards here. Certainly our local trust, we can send our patients to the mental health wards to have their detoxes, and that's, you know, there are limited numbers of beds for people, and certainly there are challenges in terms of how quickly we can achieve that for people, but it's always there. And I think that's true of most, if not every trust in Scotland, that there is at least 1 or 2 beds in each mental health ward where that's possible. So I think we do that quite well in a sense, though I wouldn't be able to kind of comment on the training, I suppose, and the expertise of people here in Scotland. So, yeah.
With the increased funding promised in mental health, what are your dreams for the future of addiction services in particular?
Yeah, so I think addiction's often the poor cousin of mental health, in that, you know, mental health is quite underfunded, and we definitely feel the effects of that, particularly in substance misuse. It can be difficult to kind of recruit and retain staff because of, well, partly because it's difficult to recruit staff, so we're often operating on a deficit, which adds to the challenges, and also because, like I said, we're doing a lot of that coordinating work and managing a lot of the, I suppose, risk side of things as well. So it's a very challenging and demanding area of work. I think, like every nurse, my dream is always to have enough staff to safely do the job, and to do the job well, and to make sure that we're able to deliver a standard of care that you know, is appropriate, essentially, and that meets people's needs in a kind of timely fashion. So I think we do that quite well, but it's often the case that, I suppose, we're taking on quite high caseloads so that we are seeing people as quickly as possible. So that's always my dream: more staff, enough funding to have more staff, to be able to achieve those things, and to make sure that we're kind of retaining the expertise that people gain whilst they're working in those services, because if we lose them, you know, their expertise goes with them, and that's always a big loss.
Thanks so much, Leanne. What are your dreams, Professor Bowden-Jones?
From my perspective, I think I would agree very much that the funding side is vital, and we will not get back to a highly functioning addiction network if we don't invest in staff. Particularly when I look at the comorbidity side of things, we know there are enormous levels of comorbidity, and at present, because the mental health services have also been rather decimated, it's very difficult for people with addictions to obtain the care they need from a mental health perspective, and doubly difficult, therefore, to potentially remain in treatment and remain abstinent, because it's so easy to turn again to the substances that are self-destructive when you're so desperate. And so investing in staff that will, in a way, bridge that gap And this again used to happen years ago, and now it's unfortunately it's not there in the right way. I think also investing more in A&E settings where people can detect and provide those interventions, and seamless access to detox facilities if needed, in order to stop the horrendous cycle of violence and of crime that it accompanies a lot of the substance misuse and alcohol. And I mean violence within families as much as outside. You know, we know that A&E on certain nights of the week gets filled up, but what we are not so discussing not so much is all the domestic violence that comes not just with the alcohol or the drugs, but indeed also the gambling, for example. We know that we've published on the significantly higher rates of domestic violence in gamblers, and so there are ways in which we could invest money in screening better and in varied settings, money for interventions in people's homes, for example, not just expecting people to come to a hospital, because access is a really big barrier to receiving treatment in terms of geographical location. Now, one of the things that has really changed in recent times due to COVID restrictions has been people's ability to access treatment remotely. And I do believe that there is a potential for investing funds into a significant network of addictions interventions that allow people eventually, if they need it, to receive a pharmacological detox. But otherwise, a lot of the work can really, and of the monitoring that Leanne was talking about, how important it is to monitor safety, not just safety in terms of people's suicidal ideation, but also safety of others around them, and the safety of the pharmacological intervention that is taking place, so that you can then deliver medication if needed. So all of these things can happen digitally now so much better. And we've certainly noticed that the National Problem Gambling Clinic, that DNA rates are almost non-existent, because you are contacting people in their own homes. People are delighted, they're saving money by not attending the appointments, but you're able to pretty much do quite a lot, most of what you would be doing face to face. It is different when you're dealing with alcohol and drugs, because the physical examination part is so much more relevant. But nevertheless, I do believe that a network linked to the digitalization of some of the services would be a very good way of spending money too.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Borden-Jones. You touched on a very interesting topic there. Why do gambling addicts have a higher rate of domestic violence than people with alcoholism?
There is a long-standing habit. We are now hopefully breaking it by using technology to fight the addiction. But up until recent times, people would ask their partners to manage the family money, to manage their income money, so that they would not gamble. And usually it would be wives, because still now 88% of the people we see at our clinic, and in general, there are just so many more men in treatment. We know that wives or girlfriends or mothers would take it upon themselves to manage the finances. And then as people became more interested in the gambling, had forgotten their shame and guilt about relapses, and wanted to try and chase losses, they would then ask for the money back, saying it's my money. And in the, until recently, there would be aggression, there would be potentially very fearful situation witnessed by children, in which the wife is trying to safeguard the money for the family. And I am sorry to use this traditional wife and husband, but this is really what we've seen for many years. Sometimes it's the other way around, of course, and sometimes it's a father looking after the son's money. But in about a couple of years ago, banks started playing a big part in helping with this issue by allowing people to receive their salaries and opt out of being able to spend money on gambling. So Monzo Bank were real heroes in this because they led the way. Starling Bank, now Barclays, and many banks now do it. So you then have at least 48 hours before you can change your mind in terms of, you know, if you remove the exclusion, it takes at least 48 hours before you can gamble. And by then, normally you've ridden that wave of craving and you are absolutely clear you don't want to lose your home to gambling, which is what a lot of our patients have done. They've literally lost the family home. And so technology has come to our help. And I will say that already, anecdotally, because we don't have the research on that clinical population, we are seeing less domestic violence because people are no longer in need of being in charge of the finances in this way.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Professor Bowden-Jones. That was really interesting. I had no idea about that. What about you, Leanne? How do you think that technology basically can drastically improve addiction services, or what do you think?
I think what we've seen with COVID is that we are able to, I suppose, speak with people over the phone or via video link more than we were before. I think it's not something that we'd really considered in any great depth before until it became a necessity. And I think it's allowed us to see perhaps when we might be being too prescriptive or restrictive with people, wanting to see them every week. And as Professor Bowden-Jones kind of pointed out, you know, it is really important to be able to do those physical examinations. But if it's a person perhaps that you need to see every week, it's certainly been helpful to be able to see people via a video link still. It misses out some of the key components of an assessment, but it does allow us to be able to be more flexible with people. Certainly I work in an area where there are remote and rural villages that we are catering to, and that most people can struggle to get into our service. And it's also difficult for us, with the number of staff that we have, to run satellite clinics to be able to provide a service out in those areas. We cover in the Forth Valley area right up to the Scottish Highlands, right down to Glasgow, over to Argyll and Bute. It's a really broad area and very diverse. So technology has allowed us to, I suppose, provide a service to people who would normally struggle to attend. We see some more engagement from people when we're using these services via video link or even just by telephone. We're actually seeing more of people, and I suppose what I sense from them is almost that they're more relaxed, I suppose, when those kind of restrictions are relaxed in a way, when they're not kind of expected to come in every single week and it's very difficult for them. There's much more of a sense of working together and a much more kind of partnership in how we're working now, which I think people appreciate, and that adds a different dynamic in a way. So it's helpful in lots of different and interesting ways. Certainly I don't think we make use of technology as much as we could do, but even these kinds of simple interventions that we've utilised in COVID have seen some quite big improvements for people.
May I add something else even that to do with technology? Again, because in the future, who knows, it may become easier to expand these lessons that we are learning in our field. But the other thing that, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, when I set up the first NHS service for gambling disorder, all we could do would be to say to people, stay away from the bookmakers and just give your money to someone else, pretty much. Not exactly, but that sort of thing. With the onset or with the transference of from land-based to online behaviors, as has happened now, where just about everyone we see is online. But some people will also go to the bookmakers, but nearly everyone is also gambling online. The self-exclusion techniques in order to what we call practice stimulus control, avoiding the avoiding the activity that is so harmful to you, have become possible. And therefore, all our patients self-exclude from all the websites, or at least they're supposed to, and they do if they're serious about abstinence. And most importantly, so that's one major development. So our outcomes are really good now, also because of technology. And the second thing is that there is software that was developed a few years ago by a company called Gamban. And essentially, once you install it in your devices, telephone, iPad, whatever, it absolutely blocks anything linked to the activity you're trying to avoid. So I'm very much hoping that they're going to develop something for gaming and indeed other compulsions, depending on what people's problems are. But at the moment, it works for gambling extremely well. So you can't remove it. And of course, gamblers don't have a lot of money because they've gambled it all if they're seriously problematic. So it's highly unlikely that they're going to go out and buy a new laptop every time they install this device, this software. So the clinic actually encourages and at times installs the stuff for our patients. So I just wanted to share that because that's quite up-to-date technology that people will not necessarily know about.
Mm-hmm. We also see something quite similar at the moment in substance misuse, in that, one of the unfortunate side effects of bringing people together who use or misuse substances is that they kind of get to know each other, they spend time with each other, and then maybe they're more inclined to, after meeting up with each other, go away and either drink or use substances. So that reduced contact we found for people means that actually they are reducing their use sometimes, and that's been quite obviously beneficial for them. So yes, there's something to be said for that. It's one of the unfortunate, as I say, side effects of bringing together a group of people who have this shared difficulty, who then find kind of peer support with each other, and then who might, be enabling each other in certain ways. So,
Professor Bowden-Jones, we'll be interested to hear about your views on addiction in younger people, such as gaming or social media addiction, and what role could technology play in the treatment of these?
After 12 years of running the National Problem Gambling Clinic as the only NHS service for gamblers, other clinics started appearing because of the NHS investment. And there is one in Leeds, for example. As part of that long-term plan, one of the clinics that was funded was the Young People's Gambling Clinic. That's now open, and we can see people from the age of 13. That's really exciting, and it's brought some new doctors, new psychiatrists and psychologists who are really interested in young people to the clinic in order to come and be trained up and work with them. But maybe most excitingly of all in recent times was the fact that I had been waiting to set up a national centre for gaming disorders for a few years. I had campaigned for it, I had taught the subject for years, and I had participated in the WHO expert group for some years. But it was only really last year that the money from the NHS arrived. So the really good news, and for anyone watching who might be interested in working at this new clinic that I run, it's called the National Centre for Gaming Disorders. Then you can look it up, NHS, and put in the title and it pops up. And what we do there is that we are commissioned to treat people from the age of 13 upwards. The majority of the first thing to say is that we were commissioned to see 50 people. We've already hit 79, and we haven't even reached the end of the year. So we didn't know, when you open a national service, when you open the first service in a country, you don't know whether you're going to have any patients. You know the problems exist in other countries. You know that from the research. But it was a relief to know that we had opened something that was going to be helpful, or at least useful to people. And what we found was that young people not only came forward, usually through either their parents referring them, or their social workers involved with the families, or the schools, a school nurse, a school counsellor. But even the young ones, even the 13-year-old ones, are really emotionally connected. You know, we are able to have really good conversations, in-depth emotional conversations with these children about why they are gaming 8, 10, 12 hours a day, why they're refusing to go to school and living in their bedrooms, why things have broken down. And so this was another incredible surprise to me, because you know, I am an adult psychiatrist, so for me to work with these children and find that connection was really special. We welcome at the gaming clinic also new young doctors, and we have several who already participated in the assessments. We've got a highly psychological treatment program for the young people. We have family therapists doing the family intervention, because of course a lot of it is about boundaries and it's about family dynamics. So we need to work simultaneously on the young person altering their behavior, but also on the family not using punitive measures, but rather working with and encouraging positive behaviors. And so the parents have been wonderful in attending as well. And I held a Q&A only last week for a whole group of parents, and I was thinking, you know, again, well, how privileged am I to meet these people who I would never have met if I hadn't set up this centre. So we will continue to have Q&A sessions for parents, but we are also planning in October a Q&A for any mental health professionals who are interested in gaming disorder. So anyone listening to your program tonight might wish to join us for that session, you know, so you'd be extremely welcome to attend. So these are really novel addictions that we are engaging with from an NHS perspective, leading the field in the NHS with evidence-based treatments, with manuals that can be rolled out across the country. Some of the books are being translated in other languages now. We are holding international meetings with colleagues in other countries, so we can extend our knowledge of what we are finding to them, and indeed learning from them as well. It's not about being the best, but we are, I think, in this country now, in terms of behavioral addictions, very, very much in a good position in terms of this new NHS plan.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone really thinks that much about gaming addiction, because just gaming is such a pastime for so many younger people that no one really thinks about people being addicted to it and how it can affect their lives. So I was just wondering your thoughts, because they do say about gambling and also alcoholism tend to be hereditary or as a result of possible influences in the home. So, but with gaming being a fairly new thing, why do you think so many younger kids are becoming addicted to games in the way that they are?
So let me, excellent question, Ewan, thank you. Let me just start by saying very well done for raising the genetics of this. We do know genetics plays a part, as it does in all addictions, both in gambling and gaming. You are more likely to have a problem if you have a parent or a grandparent or another close family member with an addiction. Now, of course, gaming wasn't around in grandparents' time, so maybe they have an alcohol issue, but what we do know is that we see a strong genetic component in a number of patients who present early on. From the age of 18, they are like stealing from their parents to use their credit card so they can gamble, or they are spending an enormous amount of time gaming in a kind of self-destructive way. So we've got that genetic component in some people, but certainly in a lot of gamers we see there is a strong environmental influence where they are using the gaming to escape very difficult circumstances, be it a transition period in a home where maybe there's a family dynamic that's changed, maybe they're being raised by one parent, or there are money troubles, or there is bullying at school. There are things that are happening that are very difficult very often in the people we see, and they are taking refuge in the gaming, and very conscious of it. They're not doing it unconsciously. They're very aware that they need the gaming as a solace to a life that right now is too difficult for them to handle. And that's why they welcome the support, because they also want to go back to a healthier, happier life. And the life, and by the way, it's not an epidemic. Some newspapers love the idea of the epidemic of gaming addiction. You know, we don't have the statistics for this country because there's been no investment in independent funding to do a high quality prevalence study for gaming. And to be honest, there has not been a good prevalence study for gambling for many years either. However, we do know that in gambling, there are roughly 55,000 problem gambling children. Whereas we do know that we don't have those facts for the gamers. In some countries, the prevalence seems to be rather high. It's lower in others, but the problem is, from a scientific perspective, we do not have the same screening tools. So we cannot tell you what the prevalence is in relation to other countries, because there are 27 screening tools at present to detect internet use disorders, gaming addiction, you name it. And that's not possible. You know, I think if you're going to give out facts, you need to make sure you do it correctly. So the biggest push I have in relation to the current government is to make sure that whilst they're reviewing the new Gambling Act, the 2005 Gambling Act that was implemented in 2007 was fine then. Maybe it was, you know, quite kind in many ways to the gambling industry, but it's certainly not fit for purpose now, because gambling online didn't exist so much in those years, and so that needs to be redone. But whilst it gets redone, we must also include in the prevalence study that is desperately needed, we need to include gaming, because there is a confluence between the two. At times there are people who, you know, go from one to the other, who start gambling on games and then move on to doing it with money. So it's highly relevant to this day and age.
Taking a more global perspective and the importance of bidirectional exchange, how can we learn from addiction services in other countries, particularly frugal innovations in lower and middle income countries?
The most important thing to state is that we have learned enormous amounts from countries across the world. And although there may be countries that don't have a lot of money, they may still have highly knowledgeable health professionals working within those countries. And so that's the first thing to say, that actually psychological interventions, you know, I can think of some colleagues working in very poor parts of India who are doing amazing cognitive behavioral interventions for gambling and gaming. And you wouldn't necessarily expect it in relation to the investments maybe that are happening, but because it is something that one can teach and it's something that is not expensive, these things are absolutely taking place. Equally, you know, when we look at across the whole globe, we have learned a lot from many countries, including Japan, including Australia, Canada. There are some colleagues who are really strong in relation to screening tools, others who are doing some randomized controlled trials. I mean, mainly that's America and Canada at the moment. But I suppose my biggest point is we can't rely on other people's data. You know, the types of behaviors that people are exhibiting in behavioral addictions do differ depending on which country they're in. So it would be wrong to think about the enormous amounts of money the NHS is going to be investing in these fields and assume that we should just use international data to justify the investment. It is much better to apportion some independent funds to working out good outcomes in NHS provision at the moment using RCTs, and then delivering more of those services because they're the ones that have proven to be effective. So I guess on this note, I would probably finish. I do believe that research needs to be invested in properly. The funds need to be absolutely separate from any industry earnings, and therefore the 1% levy that many people are discussing, where 1% of any industry earnings goes to the Treasury and it's then given to the NHS to be apportioned for treatment and research, is a very helpful and mainly very appreciated idea. Whether it will occur or not, I don't know. Hi, my name is Henrietta Bowden-Jones. I'm the director of the National Problem Gambling Clinic and the director of the National Centre for Gaming Disorders. Come and listen on Wednesday night. I'll be speaking about behavioural addictions and all you need to know about what they manifest themselves as and how you treat them.
So thank you so much to all us, because I feel like I've learned a lot, and I think that everyone here that has come out to actually listen to our HLA Live has learned quite a bit. And it was really great to hear from all of you, and it was really great that you gave up so much of your time. I know both of you are very busy and very successful in your careers, and therefore to give us so much of your time, we are very grateful for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you to everyone that made tonight's episode possible. Whenever our scholars are thinking about complex problems facing our health systems, we encourage them to think about how they make significant change in the world of healthcare. We are incredibly lucky to have some incredible scholars in the HLA. They use the HLA as a platform to take their ideas and bring them to fruition. If you are interested in the work of the HLA, why not join us at one of our future HLA events? Why not join one of our programs? Why not even become a HLA scholar? Thank you for joining us. My name is Johan Marlwana, the director of the HLA, and it's a good night from all of us.